Welcome to Tech at Scale. Every week we bring on an incredible guest to help you grow as a developer. I'm your host, Corey Darby, and this is another episode of Tech at Scale. Hello. Welcome. For exciting time of coffee and dev. And I do have my coffee. I hope you have your coffee because it is going to be quite a good episode. I am pumped and I feel like we have this in the bag. I got a new mic, so might sound a bit different. Hopefully it sounds all right. We'll just move the mic over a little bit. And let's get into this coffee and dev, all right? So we're talking about dealing with technical debt on this episode. And yeah, I mean, I think it's something that a lot of us will face. A lot of us will have gripes about. We really won't like it. A lot of people typically are pretty aggressive about this. Like they feel like everything they do is technical debt. And that really gets us into our first section, which is technical debt versus business evolving. So what I'm talking about in this is there is a difference, quite a substantial difference of what is technical debt and simply code that was implemented correctly at that time, given the constraints it had and given the choices it had at that time, but the business evolved or the tech space evolved. These are not the same. Tech debt is something that we've accrued because we've made a shortcut or we've done a hack and known that we've done a hack. It is not simply something like, oh, it's so hard to write in this code because they want to add a new billing feature and the company never had done this new billing feature. Like, why didn't we have everything 100% abstracted on day one so that we could just implement anything we could ever dream of? And it's because at that time, the business probably didn't have any other concept of additional billing in this example I'm giving. So it would have been a waste of time and resources and capacity to abstract your entire billing platform. Now, some of this we could say, like you could see maybe on the horizon that some of this might be coming down the pipeline and you did abstract some of it. But a lot of times I think as devs, we really abstract way too early. We build out these overly what we would think is simplistic systems due to the abstraction, but cause huge complexity due to the abstraction. Like, I want to add a new way of billing. And you're like, oh, no problem. Like, you only have to implement 30 different classes and make sure that you are using all these different interfaces. And God forbid you want to introduce a new concept that isn't in the abstraction. Now you have to go refactor everything else that was banked on the prior way. So understand that just because you go in and you see code and you're like, ugh, they're using like, pick whatever technology that you want to gripe against. Ansible or Chef or Puppet. In this modern day, everything is just Docker containers and Kubernetes and maybe Terraform to set up the infrastructure. How could they have done this? What technical debt we have here? And the funny thing is that in this case, there's not technical debt because maybe the system was implemented before those other tools existed. So keep that in mind. You really need to understand the difference in order to actually figure out what we're tackling. So preventing it getting worse. It's almost like a pre-step. Before we talk about how to deal with the technical debt, we need to understand how we got there in order to make sure that our changes to get us out of the technical debt or tackling the technical debt don't just transpire into basically the same thing eventually. So, and this is why I talk so much about understanding the difference of technical debt and the business evolving or the technology stack evolving. Because you could say anything you want and spend all this time tackling the technical debt and then say, oh, we need to rewrite every 3 years because the new framework came out. And they're not the same. The tech stack changing is not the same as technical debt. So what we want to do to prevent it getting worse is the simplest way I can tell you to get this to happen is do not bank on people. Machines are the way, 100%. You need to pick something to measure. It doesn't matter what it is. Everyone is going to gamify it, but you need to pick something that is your North Star to guide in code development, and standards and what you expect and what you want to avoid the technical debt. And that becomes your North Star. And then you need to build around that. So your pipeline needs to check that. You need to have it that it is extremely annoying to bypass this. Not impossible. People think that when I say that, I mean to make it impossible to bypass. No. You will never get buy-in if you make it impossible to bypass, because what's going to happen is there's going to be some emergency break glass scenario in the future where the tool that you use is deprecated or breaks and you have a bug in prod and you need to release and the container is no longer working. And if you make it basically impossible that this step cannot be skipped or cannot be removed, then what's going to happen is people are going to find a way to remove it once and they're never going to re-enable it, or you're never even going to be able to add it into the pipeline because people are like, what if the sun explodes and we need to remove it? Like, if it's impossible. So just make it very annoying to remove. So we want to automate, we want tooling, we need to discover what is the issue. And that's through architecture, design, review, talking with the team, talking with people who've been there for a while. The old guard that has all the context of how it evolved. Go get that information. You'll understand how you got in that spot. So now we have identified that we do have technical debt, or even maybe that the tech stack is causing us development productivity to be decreased because, hey, we actually need to use this framework because that one's deprecated, etc. But you have something that you now identified that is at least worthwhile tackling, and you have the measurements to make sure that you're not competing against the rest of the team as you're trying to improve. How do we tackle it? Okay, so for me, I like to cheat here. So the way that I find how to tackle it, the easiest example is you have a giant legacy code base. You joined a company that existed for 5 years, 10 years, whatever. You joined a company that existed for 2 years, but went from like 5 employees to 300 in engineering. There's going to be technical debt there. The acceleration is going to move so quickly that it is just going to build up. I like to piggyback on something called behavioral code analysis. There is a very good book. I have notes because I never remember the book's name. Software Design X-Ray, Fix Technical Debts with Behavioral Code Analysis. The short version of this is you basically piggyback on your version control. So think about it. If you have a code file that is hacky and it's garbage and nobody likes this file, but nobody's touched it in 10 years and the file is still there and it has been the same way for 10 years. That is not our primary focus. It should not be. It has been there for 10 years. So if you don't have to change that file in 10 years, it is probably stable. Even if it had a bug, it is a bug that is so small that the business has accepted that bug as is and probably considers it a feature actually. Now, if we're using something like Git, I can go and look, say, what are hotspots based off of what files change? And then from there, you could build tooling that, okay, is it precise methods within a file that constantly change? And the first thing is, okay, we have this file, it gets changed every week, and it's mostly around the same function. So probably means that's where we should start, because that is where development is spending a lot of time and effort trying to either build upon the existing or refactor already. And those are the spots where it's like, do I have tests to make sure that we're not just going to totally like nuke ourselves? Or you don't have tests, and that's the issue, is it's so frequently changed that we're introducing regression, and that's why people have to go back in, change it, fix it, go back in, change it, fix it. So version control really exposes a lot. It says, hey, every time a dev basically goes to touch this file, they always go touch these files. Great, I know that there's a dependency there. Now I can start mapping it out. And this is extremely important for like legacy systems that don't have the additional context of just being able to ask someone, hey, how's this code work? And you're kind of just thrown in. The other thing is obviously like small bits at a time. Don't just try and go and be like, we need to nuke the whole code base. I've never seen it work. Every experience I've had, it's always gone bad. It takes enormous amount of stakeholder buy-in. Midway through, management almost always cuts your capacity and timeline in half. You ask for 6 months, everyone agrees, the team or 80% of the team will work for 6 months. After the first quarter, what happens? We didn't launch this feature, we didn't launch this feature, we didn't launch this feature. All those people need to move off that and go back onto feature development. Almost always. You have to find a way to have like a strangler pattern. It is slow. It is slower, I guess that's what I should say, than just nuking it. But you have to keep the existing code base running and either introduce an entirely new component that is going to switch over, or you need to refactor the existing in line with feature development happening on top of it. It is pretty much the only way I've seen it. The only nuke the code base and start over option is, as I said, you find a way to move a component out as a standalone thing. And that's not that bad. And I think that is a good approach. And typically when you do that, I recommend that people do the strangler pattern, which is you continue to serve requests over to the old way. And when the other way hits feature parity, you start shaping your traffic to go to the other one. You always have a fallback to the old way. And then when you're comfortable that, hey, the new way is the way moving forward, you would basically drain off the old way of calling and you would no longer call that. And then you'd be able to remove that code. Yeah, so that's basically how I tackle it. And the famous thing that I always get asked when we talked about this is, and I think this slide summarizes it so well, is like, great, I agree. Everything you say is exactly what I've already known, but how do I get time? And this is probably the most anti-developer section of the presentation, because every time I tell people, every time I speak to devs on this, usually they gloss over and they just think that everything I'm saying is BS. And if I could just write the code, that everything would be fine. But I will tell you, it is all the stuff that most developers don't want to deal with, which is you need to convince stakeholders. You need to have meetings with your stakeholders. You need to measure something to convince those stakeholders into doing it. So in this case, it might be the onboarding time of someone joining your team. It might be the fact that you do exit interviews and technical people on your team consistently say that they're leaving because they do not want to work on an old code base or all the technical debt, or they felt like they couldn't make contributions that they normally could. The compounding effect of talking to like product management or whoever your stakeholder may be and saying like, hey, you know, every time we do this, it makes it harder for us to add a new feature. And at some point, it's going to, a normal feature like that, I would tell you that would take 1 day is going to end up taking like 2 weeks. And you have to have visibility on them tacking on their technical debt. If they don't see that there's shortcuts of like, okay, we'll do it to hack and we'll come back and clean it. They don't have basically a visible balance somewhere to see like, hey, you've added on an extra like 40 days of like tech debt tackling that we've never tackled. And that's why development velocity is going down. And you measure and show. So let's say you're able to convince them into it. And what I will say is at that point or during the convincing, you need to have a plan that shows how to get a short and quick win. And what I mean by that is if it is going to take longer than a month at max to be able to demo some sort of improvement that everyone can understand. It can't be some super technical developer thing like, look, hey, we got like, you know, this function that was 300 lines down to 100 or 20 lines or whatever. We removed 50,000 lines. Other stakeholders in engineering probably don't care. But if you're able to have something that's refactored, you did clean up, and you're able to go of like, you know, I don't know, O of n squared, and now just to O of n, and you're able to measure latency time on something that, you know, the company can understand and knows like, hey, when we decrease latency on these pages, we get better conversion on billing. Now people care. And now your little short exercise is like, how do we do more of that? We want more of that. And you're like, well, we could refactor the code base, which would let us tackle more of those things, such as A, B, C, D. all of a sudden people are coming to you asking you, how do we do what you want? Instead of you going to them and saying, hey, I would really like to clean up all this code so that developers don't hate working in it and we're more productive. So that is everything for today for Coffee and Dev. As always, I hope you learned something. I hope you're able to finish your coffee. And for more content, I am on, I actually don't post that often on TikTok, but I'll have it here. Twitch and YouTube. And what I will say is on Twitch, I have started streaming some of these presentations as I make it. If you're interested in how I do these, I think I streamed this presentation along with like the next one. Took me like, I don't know, 45 minutes. And I plan to also stream some of the book writing that I am trying to do for this Trino book that I'm trying to write. And I would like to write, but I have some of the draft and outline stuff that I need to go through, at least that I spoke out loud. And I'm trying to use the stream as an accountability thing. So if you're interested and would like to see that, feel free. It is, all of these are Tech at Scale, except YouTube. I don't have the channel name because we don't have enough subscribers because you haven't subscribed to the channel yet. But once we hit 100, I will add the custom Tech at Scale channel. But if you just Google YouTube Tech at Scale, you'll be able to find the channel. Twitch is twitch.tv/Tech at Scale, and TikTok is @Tech at Scale. So have a great weekend. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed your wonderful coffee or whatever you're drinking. And until next time on Wednesday, adios.